Please do stay seated. We have a coffee break after this panel. C'est bon? Please do stay seated. I think it's fitting after Mr. Murdoch's comments on the promise of the internet and what it can bring to education that we have a panel on the future of the internet. And I give the floor to my friend David Rowan from Wired UK. Thank you very much. Good luck.
Thanks a lot. So welcome. We have a high-end panel. And I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to introduce... Can you hear? Mike? Hello? We have audio. So we have a fantastically talented panel, and I'm not going to waste any time. We're going to go straight in. I'm asking each of our panelists to tell us in 2 or 3 minutes one transformative technology that's going to be shaping our lives over the next 5 years. I'm going to start with Craig Mundie, who's Chief Research and Strategy Officer at Microsoft, a man who has about 950 of the world's sharpest brains at his disposal, solving all sorts of problems, coming up with the sorts of technology that allows us to interact with our Kinect devices. If you want the Star Wars holodeck, this is the man who will give it to you. Craig.
Thank you, David. So the thing I wanted to comment on that I think will be really transformative in the next few years is really the transition of the interface between people and computers. For 30 years, it's been dominated by pointing, clicking, typing, and now touching, but all in a graphical metaphor. And the biggest change that's going to come is the ability for the computer to emulate almost all of the human senses, and so the ability for computers to be more like us. And with that, the challenges that many people have, particularly as we think about expanding to a planet of 6 billion, going to 9 billion, and ultimately 10 billion in the course of the next century, you know, those people are not going to come in thinking that they have to master touch typing or understand even how to read in some sense. That if they can deal with another person, they should be able to deal with the computer. And so by changing the semantic level of the interaction between people and machines, I think we'll also be able to then ratchet up the level of support that we expect the computer to give to people. And so while we can have this entire conversation, most of us are always just thinking of the internet and how we access the internet and how the devices have transformed that access, moving from a traditional computer down to a cell phone. But I think at the end of the day, when you just eliminate a tremendous barrier, which is having to master the traditional computer interface, then we're going to see another complete revolution in how people use computers and what they expect them to do for them.
So it's an era when technology disappears and you have the natural user interface.
Right. The things you know how to do in your natural life will be all you need to do, all you need to know to do anything with a computer.
Thanks, Craig. Paul Jacobs is Chairman and Chief Executive of Qualcomm, a man who last year spent $2.5 billion on R&D. He's also behind a new X Prize, a $10 million prize, the Tricorder Prize, to help with medical diagnostics. We have to thank Paul for putting the first GPS chip in a cell phone. If it wasn't for Paul, we wouldn't be checking into locations. Paul, what's the transformative idea over the next 5 or so years?
Well, so you asked for something that was 5 to 10 years out, and I'm thinking, what takes that long? You know, it has to be something that governments get involved with and slow down. So I thought healthcare, that's a pretty good one to talk about. And really the combination of wireless with healthcare, the notion that, you know, in developed countries, populations are aging, doctors are aging with them. So, you know, we better get our doctors that we have more productive, Obviously, the cost, the healthcare industry is extending our lives and emptying our wallets at the same time, so we better be more productive and cost-effective. And so what does it mean if you connect wireless plus healthcare and maybe also with genomics? Well, healthcare becomes much more personal, becomes much more real-time. 75% of healthcare costs are spent on people with chronic diseases. And what's the issue there? It's compliance, it's monitoring. And if you can do these things in real time, for example, with a device like this, which is a continuous glucose monitor that's wireless, you stick it on your body and it keeps track of your glucose levels if you're diabetic. And a diabetic that takes care of themselves, they cost to maintain that person. We talked to some insurance companies. It's like a 10 to 15x difference. So you get better quality of life, you get lower costs, and really solve a lot of problems by continuous monitoring. Another area where we can get some productivity, we had a company do a thing which is for fertility. So today, if you go in and you can't have a child and you go for in vitro fertilization, that's very, very expensive and many people can't afford it. This device is a device that a woman wears underneath her armpit, measures her temperature, talks to this device, and when it's time, that when they're most fertile, then it tells them that it's time to do something. And something. And they're so, this works so well that they have a money-back guarantee on this product. So this is another wireless thing. And we talk about the tricorder. You think of the tricorder was a thing that in Star Trek they waved in front of your body and it told you something about your health. And so, if you're going to build one for today, what do you do? Is it something you spit into? Do you draw blood? Or is there a way of just waving it over your body? And we were talking to a cardiologist in San Diego, and these guys came up with this little rice grain-sized sensor that you can put under the skin, and it detects cells that will tell you you're about to have a heart attack in the next 24 hours. So you can imagine that there might be sensors inside your body that your smartphone is just talking to. And before you think that that's totally crazy, there was a study done at USC with 100,000 people with implantable defibrillators, which showed that if the defibrillator was connected, meaning that it could be remotely monitored, as opposed to people who couldn't be remotely monitored and had to go into a clinic, there was a 50% reduction in mortality. Connectivity does that. There are few things in the world that will get a 50% reduction in mortality. So wireless health is, I think, it's the wave of the future.
So nobody's going to argue with a 50% cut in mortality. But if we're giving out all this personal bodily data, presumably there are security issues. There's issues over who gets access to this data.
Oh, absolutely. And there's other things like if you are running equipment in the hospital, you certainly don't want hackers to get into it. So, because the consequences are far greater than losing your credit card. You might lose your life. So absolutely, the issues of security, both hardware, software, all kind of hardened systems are going to be very important. But we can solve problems that are killing people on a much, much greater basis today by getting connectivity into these devices. So I think it's a trend of the future.
Which other panel at the EG8 is promising you a healthier, longer life? Thank you. Peter Chou is responsible for a lot of those smartphones you're tweeting on. CEO of HTC, co-founder back in '97. In the last quarter, he sold 9.3 million smartphones, and revenue alone was up, 90% last year. 25 million handsets last year, rising quickly. Peter, what's going to change? What's coming?
The wireless industry has gone through radical change the last few years. The innovations and technology achievement enable wireless industry to impact every aspect of people's life. And we are talking about internet, but I want to talk a little bit more about mobile internet. And mobile internet is actually driving the fundamental change in mobile industry, business, individual lifestyle, and society, and even democracy. We talked this morning. And all these are amazing change. And we are in a smartphone era, and smartphone, 4G, mobile video, cloud computing, social networking, all kinds of services will completely change how people live, work, get things done, and stay connected with people. And the fast mobile broadband is setting the stage for new mobile video, and this new internet mobile video will drive the innovation and the revolution. And this new mobile internet will create a new generation of TV and video experience. And with the expectation of the flexibility of viewing choice, that consumer will have control of their own choice and search and whatever they want to control to view on different kind of devices. And NFC is another important thing we are seeing coming globally.
Explain what NFC is to people that don't know.
NFC is a radio technology, is near field that can connect to a point of sales device and they can pay. But NFC does not only limit it to mobile payment. It actually also mobile ticketing, mobile coupon, and access to your office and cars. And NFC has actually a lot broader capability. So we are all excited about all these new technology, new innovation coming the next few years. Mobile head is one of those. But we should not look at these as one innovation being important. And, we have seen amazing advance in technology, hardware, software, network, and services. I mean, the trick is more like how to make all these parts work together that people can be beneficial. And we see HTC, we are the kind of company, we have the responsibility to ensure people will be able to tap full potential of mobile in their life.
A lot of mobile video, a lot of paying with our cell phone. Now, Danny Hillis has been online longer than most people in this room. He bought the second ever domain name. And sadly, I don't think it was the sex.com one, which was rather valuable. It was, what was it?
Think.com.
Think.com. So Danny co-chairs and is CTO of Applied Minds, which works on lots of secret projects for companies like Intel and Herman Miller and the military. I think you've just launched a micro-satellite.
Yes, we did.
Done a lot of work in AI. But what is the big idea that's coming that we should all be planning for?
So the big thing that is going to really matter is completely different than what we've been talking about. We've been talking about the human uses of the internet as essentially human communication, humans to humans. That's the web, Facebook, things like that. The really important thing is going to be the machine-to-machine communication. And so what will happen over the next 5 or 10 years is all of our infrastructure will begin to operate through the internet. And we will become dependent on this thing, which very, very few people will understand how it actually works. So if I were the G8, I would not be asking, what can I do for the internet or what can I do to the internet? I would be asking, what is the internet going to do to me? Because I think it will fundamentally change the relationship of the nation state to its citizens. When the nation state can no longer comprehend how its basic services are provided, then its ability to regulate those, control those, become worse than irrelevant. It actually becomes at odds with the goals of the citizenry. And I believe that it is already true that really most governments do not understand how much of our infrastructure depends on the internet. They have no concept of what would happen if the internet stopped. They think it would be like you can get to Facebook and Amazon or something. No, that's not true. The electricity would stop. Trucks wouldn't know where to go. Food would not be delivered to people's tables. And over the next 5 years, that's going to become more and more true. And it's going to be true that leaders can no longer manage with the intuition of how the infrastructure works. So, Napoleon knew about the sewer system and kind of had a picture of how the sewer system works and actually made decisions about the sewer system that were very sensible decisions. Our current leaders have no concept of actually how their infrastructure works, and I think that's the key issue.
So, Danny, once the G8 leaders have accepted the idea that the internet's going to fundamentally change the nature of the nation state and its remit, what should they do?
Well, I think one of the things they need to do, a question that they're not asking, is what happens if it breaks? So they're beginning to say, what can we do to defend it and prevent it from breaking? But that's a very easy question by comparison to the question, what happens if it breaks? And as far as I know, none of the G8 have seriously asked that question. And yet it will break. And, it may break because of a malicious attack. It may break because of an accidental attack gone wrong as it's broken in the past. I mean, I'm old enough to remember it having broken twice. And, it will break in the sense that it will not provide the services people have come to depend on in the future. And I have seen no serious effort to address that issue. And I would include my own nation, who's just come out with a cybersecurity policy, but it's all about, it's dancing around the problem.
G8, don't forget to back up your internet regularly. Paul Hermelin, Chief Executive of Capgemini since 2002, about 10,000 clients they're advising. Previously worked in various ministries, Jacques Delors' economic ministry. I've got initials DSK in the Ministry of Industry, but I'm not allowed to talk about that one. Paul, what do you see as affecting us now?
Since this morning, we cannot but be struck by the staggering figures we heard about Stéphane Richard mentioning that the bandwidth is increasing, the flood of data, 500 million smartphones. But what strikes me more is, first, all these traffic leaves some kind of footprint, some kind of data. And if I can use that word, there is a kind of a tsunami of data. And this data will be exploited, and I think we will enter a world where 100 years after Henry Ford, we will enter a world of personalization, utmost personalization of services. People fear for intimacy, but the young people trade pretty comfortably anonymity versus convenience. So they go for that. And I think that's a challenge, and we hear the government caring about intimacy. We heard the reaction when Google started to take pictures of streets and localization. But I think the young generation does not object to it. And I think that's a wave that we see with our customers that want to deliver personalized services to their clients. And I think that will trigger a change of behavior from the client, including the, if I can use these words, the clients of the public service. And I think that's the wave the government will face, where users, clients, will ask for a personalized healthcare. So it is my medicine, my hospital, my doctor, my way, my electronic record, my medicine, my drugs. But we should think that one day the young people will ask for my education. They don't want to go to a generic high school. They don't want to go to a generic college. They want to go for my education. And I don't know how the unions of teachers will react to that, because that will be a massive change of paradigm of the whole educational system. But the government should not be reluctant, because they will love to ask us about predictive patterns for fraud, tax fraud. So we will provide that. So there will be flows of data, data storage, predictive management, and that will transform the entire economy. We move from the Fordist economy to the personalized economy. And that's my view. It's now. So let's not wait for pipelines. Let's not wait for more bandwidth. The future is now.
So, Paul, you're saying the digital generations are sacrificing personal privacy for the benefits of personalization. But we also hear that regulators, not least in Europe, are trying to protect privacy. There are rules about what we can do with cookies, and they're trying to push for opt-in.
I think in '95, I heard a kind of ancestor, a high respect for him, Scott McNeely, who was then the CEO of Sun. And Scott told me privacy is over. Privacy was a short period of time for mankind. People lived in rural areas, small villages, where there was no true anonymity. They have flocked into large industrial gathering with the Industrial Revolution. Over. Privacy is over.
Policymakers haven't quite accepted that.
Yeah, but they will love also when we will tell them that by building profile we can help them fight terrorism, then they might like that.
Our sixth panelist, Michel de Rosen, is Chief Executive of Eutelsat, which channels 3,850 TV channels into people's homes, but still there's nothing worth watching. About 1,100 radio stations, about 200 million people reach you. You're about to launch another satellite for internet broadband. Michel.
So, by the way, the last satellite you mentioned, called KSAT, is a satellite that, in fact, we launched in December, but it will be operational in exactly 1 week. 1 week. It is called KSAT, and it is currently the most powerful satellite in the world. It will provide broadband services up to 10 megabit to 1 million households in Europe and North Africa. So a fantastic beast, a great super satellite, a smart satellite anyway. On your question, your original question, I'd like to pick 2 examples of trends that we are already observing and that we believe will become bigger and bigger. One is 3D, the other one is connected TV. In our world, the world of broadcast, we saw the era of analogical TV. We moved to numerical TV, digital TV. Then recently we started moving into high definition from standard definition. And now we see 3D. Most people see 3D as just a nice way to see great movies like Avatar or movies of that kind. In fact, it will be a trend in the world of movies. It will also be a trend in the world of television. And it will also be a trend, we believe, in the world of personal computers. So what might you say? Well, this may change the way you enjoy culture. You don't need to go to the Met anymore because you can see the Met in Arkansas or wherever you live. If you don't like traveling, you don't need to travel because you can go around the world from home. If you have a serious medicine issue, a great surgeon may help you from wherever he is, depending on where you are. I won't insist on the benefits of connected TV. We all understand that it is the consumer who wants power, who wants to decide what he's watching. He doesn't want anybody to decide for him. The reason, Paul, I chose these 2 examples, which are 2 trends which are well known already, is that they also create significant challenges, and I will only name 2. One challenge is digital divide. This conference is speaking of how the internet is growing and expanding. We should not forget the fact that some people do not have access to broadband. And the more broadband grows for the haves, for the early adopters, the more those who do not have it feel they are the victims of the digital divide. So that is an important challenge. And a second challenge is that trends like connected TV or 3D eat more and more bandwidth. And so the problem of availability of bandwidth is going to become even more serious in the years to come. These 2 challenges, I believe, are worth our attention.
Okay, I heard the head of Endemol in Uncrease say recently that whoever cracks this connected TV the interface that embeds our social connections with TV would become the richest person in the world. So there's a challenge for you. So there's a common theme here to open up the debate, the data tsunami that's about to hit. We're watching mobile video, we're tracking our bodily output. Is the infrastructure in a position to cope? Paul?
Which Paul, me?
Yes.
All right. Well, I mean, if you look at the wireless systems, obviously they're under a lot of stress because people are downloading a lot of data on them right now. And so one of the things that we've been working on with governments is ways to free up more spectrum. And despite what Eric Schmidt said this morning, the technologies aren't fundamentally different. We've gotten to the point where an individual radio link is roughly the same. We've done all the tricks we know how to do on the radio links, at least in the labs right now. So it's going to be about getting more spectrum. So LTE is about going to wider and wider spectrum. It's also going to be about getting the network closer to the user. So user deployable network, much like Wi-Fi is done. And then it's going to be about finding chunks of spectrum that previously were hard to use. So we've done things like adding multiple downlinks, which means the radio link that goes from the network to your device. Today, most of the systems you use, the up and the down, from your device to the network and from the device to the network, these are the same size. And usually it's the down, the one to your device, that's so congested. So we found ways to find underutilized pieces of spectrum and allow them to be paired on the downside to get more stuff down. And then you're going to do software tricks. You're going to cache content on the device. You're going to broadcast to multiple devices when there's more users that want to look at something. You're going to do a lot of offloading. There's going to be not just cellular radios. Obviously, people use Wi-Fi, but then there's going to be more peer-to-peer radios coming. So there's just be a multiplicity of things that are going in your phone to make it easy for you to get this content that's creating this huge data tsunami.
Paul, at Capgemini, do you think we need to pay more attention to the infrastructure, and who's going to fund this investment?
Yeah, I think so. Frankly, the bottleneck might one day be the infrastructure. So we heard this morning the McKinsey report. We see the potential. And I would say we heard the implicit dispute, if I can say that, between the network operator and the content player, thinking who should be remunerated for what. So I just say, if there is a shortage of bandwidth, if there is a shortage of capacity, we might have to revisit the way the revenue are split between operators and the rest. But I think in a market economy for, let's call that dense geographies. At lunchtime, the French president pointed at less dense geographies, the kind of French rural areas that might not be equipped. And I understand the task for the taxpayer for potentially not addressing these non-marketable areas. But I think today the main question is we must invest very rapidly, and I think we must adjust the way the revenue are split so that the people in charge of that investment can continue.
Okay. Now, one of the things we're trying to do here is find a way to grow our little European economies, find ways for the internet to be part of this, to generate new business opportunities. Where do you, panel, see the opportunities that the ministers need to encourage in terms of building economic growth?
Well, I think you need to make a distinction between the kinds of problems that governments will naturally solve if left to themselves and that large companies will naturally solve, and problems that actually require some leadership and some vision to solve. So, for example, the increasing the bandwidth, that's a reactive problem. It's very easy for anybody to draw a straight line extrapolating the amount of bandwidth required, and companies will invest in it and they will solve these problems, and governments will be able to plan for it and they will solve the problem, and there will be moments when they're behind and moments when they're ahead and so on. But those don't really require vision and leadership to solve. On the other hand, if you look at some of the other challenges to the network, and for example, I would put robustness in that example. If we treat that in the normal way that we treat problems, we will ignore it until there's a huge disaster. And only then will we go back and try to address the problem. So I think that if you're asking the question, what could we do differently? We should concentrate on those things that, in fact, are not going to be solved by the process of responding to things, but actually have to be solved by the process of imagining things and anticipating new problems actually before they become a disaster. And I don't think we're on that course right now.
I'll go back to what I talked about when we first started, which is if you look, you got to look far enough out to find an opportunity that not everybody's pursuing, that you can create enough value that you can build economies on. And look, there's plenty of money in the healthcare industry. We all know that. In fact, it's bankrupting most developed economies right now. These things that I showed off, these sensors were made by small companies. So the individual in their garage can come up with some kind of thing like this, and then they hook it into something that a big company like us does. We provide the transport, the chips that do that, and then the operators provide the transport into the network and so forth. But, there are opportunities like that. If you look at not just the fixed internet, but the wireless internet, and you look at it not just for access to the internet, but as Danny was talking about, for machine to machine, and, green energy, smart grid, all these kinds of things are opportunities that are far enough out there that governments can make policy decisions that create the opportunity for a small entrepreneur to build something. And that, to me, that's where people should be focusing. You shouldn't look where, as Wayne Gretzky famously said, where the puck was. You got to skate to where the puck's going. And I think, you got to look out far enough, and then you got to create policies today that are not overly restrictive but are supportive. So in the healthcare area, we have this problem that getting devices through the regulator is incredibly complex and incredibly expensive, and that makes drugs very slow to come out and makes very large companies have to do them. So if you change those kinds of policies, things can happen.
Michel?
Go ahead. I was going to say, I think in any country now, if you really want to figure out how to take your intellectual capital and convert it into jobs or some economic advance, this space is so large. Just look at the range of comments on this panel that we're all predicting some fairly radical change in the course of the next 5 to 10 years. So just say, okay, let's say there's 6 pucks. They're all out there. We told you they're there. And the question is, how do you get your team lined up to go actually score with the puck? And I think the problem most governments have today is that they don't have a policy that lines up everything in the stack, including their education system, their incentive system, their taxation system, and basically creates the incentives. It says pick any level of this problem. Pick the communications level. Pick the internet robustness problem or the security problem, or pick any one of these large areas. But if you don't pick something, why do businesses succeed? Because they don't try to do everything. They try to do one or two things well. And I think right now you see a palette from which to paint a picture that's so uncontrolled or unconstrained that you don't get that kind of focus. And I think economies who want to have a differential advantage or a differential effect in creating jobs or improving their economic well-being, I think are going to have to pick something and decide that that's where they're going to invest. Pick a couple things, but just hoping that it's all going to come together, particularly in Europe, because of frankly the weaker educational system in the technology domain, is a limiter, and unless there's going to be some investment there, I think in Europe in particular, it's going to be hard to just pray that it all lines up somewhere.
Okay. So Michel, you talked a bit about the digital excluded. How much is it government's role to ensure universal online access? Is internet access a human right?
Well, if I may answer that question and also the previous one, I'll try and make 2 observations. One observation is that, especially in France, It's a tradition when there is an economic crisis to throw taxpayers' money to fix it. And sometimes it's well done, and sometimes it is not well done. In our field, some people believe that by putting billions of euros of taxpayers' money to put fibers everywhere, that would make France or Europe more competitive. I believe that, in fact, the solution is a good complementarity of technologies, that fibers are indeed absolutely needed for a great part of the population, but that for people who live in other neighborhoods, in the countryside or in mountains, other technologies like, I'm sorry to say, the satellites are a better solution. So I'm just advocating a good complementarity of technologies. There is no miracle or magic technology. Observation number one. Observation number two is that some things can be done that cost no taxpayers' money at all. For instance, a decision could be made by the G8, it could be made by European governments to say that internet access becomes a universal service obligation. This is already effective in Switzerland with Swisscom or in Finland with TeliaSonera. It is technologically feasible, it is financially feasible. It would then make sure that in Europe, everyone is included in the broadband area, which I'm sure would not only be fair, but would also be good for economic growth.
Should we extend this to foreign policy? Should governments take a position in ensuring, let's say, tyrants don't cut off the internet to their citizens?
I won't answer that one, but I just say, we know, and that will certainly be another topic of discussion for the G8, that states are not all broke, but they are not in the best financial shape. So there are cuts everywhere that are envisioned and led everywhere. So the question is, and there is a big claim for social treatment of the crisis. So how will we avoid to sacrifice education? We all think we should invest more in education. If we think of a world that is a continent, India, you see the benefits it has reaped from a massive investment in education. Same for China. So we must push countries to pursue educational effort, and my big fear of the spending cuts that we can foresee is they will be try to preserve a social treatment of the crisis and not enough investment in education.
So I think that this is a very interesting time, and this is the time, actually just the beginning of the smartphone era or mobile internet, and industry technology services are happening a lot faster than most government process. Most government actually takes a lot of time, really try to make sure everything has been taken care. But the industry is so diverse, and we are working on too many things. You know, radio technology, network technology, the social networking, and I think over time, what really required is we need a good global citizen creating ecosystem that all industry really support, and instead of just relying on government to make a regulatory policy, I think it's just too slow and too hard. So the best way is, I believe, the mobile operators and industry partners and all actually get together, create the ecosystem that will work for all of us. And some services, like for example, mobile video, that kind of things could be a paid service. And the NFC may really require a global ecosystem to create some sort of protocols that work for all the countries. And mobile health is a tough one, to be honest, because it involves hospitals and governments, and all these, Poland, we are working a long time. This is actually a very tough one. And this would definitely require government involvement. And I think a mobile operator are caught in the middle right now because they have this base station network, and but there are a lot of company, a new kind of company. They are not typical telecom company, and they create a service layer which create direct relationship with consumer, and they have the knowledge with consumer, and they are directly taking advantage of that. So sort of like bipartisan network operators, and the same for some of the application as well. But over time, I believe we talked a little bit from the previous panel or this morning, that it is not possible that network operator just investing and losing money and providing all these services. There must be a way that we can, create these kind of ecosystem.
So we've got a strong sense here that there's this thing called the network, which is separate from government. So let's look at a few things where government has traditionally tried to get involved. Let's look at copyright and intellectual property. Can governments do anything now? Is copyright over as we've understood it?
Well, government could do a lot of harm, certainly. And I think it is likely. I think that's part of why the question about growth, I think everybody indirectly answered the question to say, well, government needs to not prevent growth. And copyright is a great example where government could do that. So, for example, if a government were to pass a law saying an e-book has to cost as much as a paper book, then it would actually set back the growth. It would put a tax on all their citizens, preventing their ability to access books as well as the rest of the world. It would put a damper on growth. So that's the kinds of interventions I think you will happen. They'll mostly have negative effect on growth rather than positive effect on growth.
Craig, do you think the governments, the legal systems are going to solve the copyright issues?
I think it's going to end up being a balance of some technological solutions that'll help, either do the accounting or doing the control, coupled with, governments making it clearer, what they choose to interpret, for example, fair use to be. Clarity, even on things which have been well established by law and precedent, but how they will choose to interpret them, will allow the technology solutions to dovetail with that. I think a lot of the places, the discussions today about, in my opinion, the whole question of network neutrality versus, the investment in the network. A lot of the uncertainty there comes because governments historically get involved, at least in some countries, in price regulation of the network services. But you can't tell the network operator, you must build an infinite network and I'm going to regulate your price. And so I think it's, in my view, in almost every case, you have to look at where the historical regulatory models are now intersecting, this natural evolution of the network and the applications, and at least try to get clarity about how the existing laws will be interpreted. And from that, I believe in almost every case, you'll find a complementary technological approach that will help balance things out. I think, Eric Schmidt sort of said that in his remarks this morning today. I think that's the biggest thing that the technologist tends to come at the problem with, is saying, I'll find a technology to solve that problem. And most people who don't have that technology orientation tend to look at a way of extrapolating the way it was done in the past to be the answer for how it will be done in the future. And I think that's why this particular panel, is trying to say, no, you've got to realize that the internet of the future won't look anything like the internet of today. It'll be more machines talking to each other. People won't be typing on keyboards. The devices used may not even look like the ones you know today. And I think, therefore, the regulation has to be considered, in that context.
Another area of government intervention has been when it perceives dominance by certain companies. Microsoft faced this. Paul Hermelin, how much do you see governments intervening more to try and protect markets when there are dominant players running access to apps or musics in closed platforms?
Two remarks. The first one on your previous question on copyright. I think we cannot build and we cannot see a world of any investment built on authorized piracy. That's clear. So we need. The problem is copyright and intellectual property should not be an obstacle for innovation. And from time to time, people try to hide behind copyright to protect the status quo. And we see that some changes occur, which comes to the problem of these potential technological monopolies, which is a question, frankly, if you think of that, even Capgemini has been created in 1967 as an attempt to help our customer be more free towards technological giants. At the time, these were old names that we have forgotten. IBM has survived, HP has survived, but there were many that Univac and some other that disappeared. If you think of it, I heard 10 years ago people fearful about Microsoft, Craig. There were a lot of fears about the Microsoft dominance, and now it was Google, and tomorrow or today it's already Facebook, and I just say the limit of these monopolies has always been that any technological disruption creates room for new things to occur, and that has been the pattern over the last 20 years. I mean, I don't know when you will ask tomorrow to Mark Zuckerberg what will threaten Facebook tomorrow. But I guess if I was in his shoes, I would already worry, because there is probably somewhere, most probably on the Silicon Valley, someone that prepares what will be the Facebook of 2012. 2015, let's say.
Completely separate subject. Battery life. Surely that's holding back innovation. I want to know, Peter Chou, are we going to solve this one in the foreseeable future?
Can I talk a little bit the IP issue first? I think this is definitely the global government organization need to look at, to find a balance. Because today, I think, it's kind of protection, but actually it is limit a lot of small companies to innovate. And after all, consumers are not beneficial because these IPs, they have to pay many IP to many companies. So eventually, actually consumer paying those. So government actually need to really take a new view of how to balance these IP, the balance protecting the IP creators and the balance of the innovations and consumer. And government never thought of that. Government, the original IP is more like protecting the creator. So that's one. Battery, yeah, we're working on that. So we're working on that. The devices are getting more powerful every year, and the frequencies and the radio technology, 4G LTE, all these are eating a lot of battery power. And battery is one area innovate very, very slow. It improve something like a 10 to 15% a year, and this is not going to enough in the future because at the same time we want to have a big screen, super high resolution, and we have dual-core, quad-core, and we are doing LTE, but as I said, we want a device as small as possible, thin, and this a lot of conflict in this area, but But however, the good news is we are seeing some good signs starting from maybe 2012, 13. There's a chance to have a maybe high improvement in a battery technology.
Paul, you're a director of a battery company. Do you agree?
Well, so it's definitely the case that on the supply side, things have gone slowly. So the batteries are getting better, not as fast as demands go up. But one of the other things that we're working on right now is wireless charging, so that you'll actually be able to use your phone, put it down on the desk or in your car or somewhere, and it actually recharges from that. So that on the supply side, that helps. On the demand side, there's more and more integration of the chipsets, and we go to smaller and smaller feature size on the processes that create those chips, and therefore they use less power. The new microprocessor that we're just bringing out now, for the same amount of computation, uses 25% of the power of the previous version. So we have found a way to do that. And then it's also the display, as Peter said. And one of the things that we're working on right now is using reflective displays, like what a Kindle uses, an e-ink display, except this will do color and video. And then the question is, will consumers accept that? Because today they really like very bright and vivid screens, and to get a very, very bright and vivid screen takes a lot of power. So what are the trade-offs there? When will people accept a little less bright of a screen, more reflectivity? I mean, if I look at my phone today, most of the power gets used up in the display. So we're working on that technology as well.
Talk a bit more about the new user interfaces, the new ways we're going to interact with the machine. So we've seen from Kinect that we can put ourselves in the screen, but what's it going to mean in everyday life? What's it going to mean about driving a car? How are we going to control these devices?
I think, flying planes and driving cars, I don't think are going to be one of the first things that will try to change the fundamental model of control. I think other places, one of the things that we actually are going to light up in a couple of months is using this not to put yourself into a game, but to basically put yourself into an avatar and send the avatar out to meet other avatars. And so it basically is a telepresence capability. So the idea that you can have communication and collaboration at increasingly high fidelity, but also at lower and lower bandwidth, because you substitute computation for communication bandwidth. And I think that's one of the things that people are going to start to experience, where natural interaction will be very important, because it's no different than sitting here and looking at each other and talking and gesturing and hearing. The question is, how do you let people do that in cyberspace instead of only in the physical space? So I think a big part of what will become natural interaction is not strictly the sensory emulation, but is going to be things that build bridges between the physical world and the virtual world. So you can see it today with some of the new tag technologies or the NFC capabilities or RFID things. These are ways where it becomes fairly natural to translate something, from the physical world into the virtual world. And I think, I predict that that's going to be one of the most rapidly evolving natural user interfaces. Today, if you look at the way some of these tagging technologies, or even the image recognition technologies are being used, you don't sit there and say, oh, I'm in Paris and I wonder what that building is, and you try to describe it or put in the street address or something else. You just take a picture of it, or on the street post next to it, there'll be a little tag, and you look at the tag, and it tells you everything there is to know about it. It's like you used to only have to go to museums where somebody had curated everything, to be able to get that kind of experience. I think the world's going to offer us a curated experience for almost everything, where you can map between sort of the physical world and the virtual world, and that's going to make interacting in this space much more natural.
Just more specifically on your question, David, I think another big wave that we're going to see is what people call the Internet of Things. So smarter devices, smarter objects communicating together. So we should probably see pretty soon a world where my car will communicate to its neighboring cars, and if it rains, send signal if the other gets too close. I mean, that's what car manufacturers today design. And I just say, the other day, Craig showed us a PC that emulates an avatar of Craig. I told him that he had a little more hair on his avatar, but he speaks like Craig with his accent, with his voice. And this kind of, we will be surrounded by these smarter objects that will communicate together. And the question at the end is, when will the community of these objects overcome mankind as a whole, because they will have more intelligence than us, and what will they do with us?
So to wrap up, I mean, one of the things we're here to talk about is how the internet can be a big driver for economic growth. So I'm going to put you all on the spot here. If you had to invest your own assets in a business that was going to give you a return, a substantial return, in the next 5 to 10 years, not the business that you're already in, where would it be? Danny?
Biotechnology, clearly. It wouldn't have anything to do with the internet.
Paul Jacobs?
I think I said already, but we're investing in healthcare.
I actually would have said the intersection of two things, which is the biohealth stuff and these advanced information technologies. I think that the society is going to need that everywhere. We don't have a scalable way to deliver it to 6 billion people, and the only way to solve the health problem in the future is to capitalize on the fact that biology is going digital too. And I think at the intersection, that's a great place to invest.
Sorry, that's what I meant. We're combining what we're doing today with healthcare.
Michel?
I would hesitate between investing in healthcare, also the way Paul said it, or in new dishes, more customer-friendly dishes, smaller dishes that you can put at home and that can change the life of viewers. However, I do want to add this, as time is running out. We spoke of great things in this panel, but we need to think of the people who are not in the G8, like Africa. There is 1 billion Africans. 50% of Africans have a mobile telephone. 10% only have access to the internet. It is vital, it is fundamental, and the G8 must show that they care about this, that the new technologies, complementary technologies, both terrestrial and satellite, be developed so that a growing number of Africans have access to the internet. This is doable because of 3G. A goal could be that in 10 years or 9 years, 50% of Africans have access to broadband, to the internet.
Invest in Africa. Paul?
I would think of biotechnology, but I don't not that knowledgeable about the broader world of nanotechnology, which may have a role in health, but beyond health. I think nanotechnology is an underestimated field.
And finally, Peter.
Well, I will stay very focused on mobile internet. We talk about these Internet of Things, and we expect, for example, 2014, 15, 70 to 80% of the CE device will be all connected. And there's a tremendous opportunity for us to working on the opportunities, and mobile had everything. And I still remember that 10 years ago, Paul and I working on the smartphone. Some people love us because it was break. But today, smartphone is the mainstream product. So we have to take some risk to working on things, maybe take 10 years. But some things may take us 2 or 3 years. But we just need to keep working on.
I'd call that insider tips, whatever the regulators in your area say. Good investment tips. So to draw all these hundreds of ideas to a conclusion, which is quite challenging, it seems that it's more regulators, government's role to build and maintain the infrastructure, to be aware of some of the security risks, some of the breakage risks now that we're so reliant on the internet, to create the conditions for the personalization of these services, but really to leave free enterprise to go and build the next digital corporations. Is that more or less right?
I'd say that's a good summary. I mean, it's the job of governments to create the preconditions where their people can be creative and prosper. And the things that you've named are ways that governments can do that around the internet.
And they need to look that step ahead at how behavior is changing. Thank you, fantastic panel. Thanks for your time and your thoughts.